Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Boost Your Supply Chain Performance. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit that's building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. And so, as you will see in the chat in a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So, definitely make sure to check out those links and resources in the chat. And then just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from in the chat. We always love to connect. And second, we are going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please make sure to submit your questions for us in that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation, and we will try our best to get to all of them. And of course, none of what we do could be possible at the center without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, BMO, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, Microsoft Entrepreneurship for Positive Impact, BPM, and HubSpot for Startups. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. And so before we get started, we always like to launch just a couple polls to step back and see how everyone in the room is doing today. This first one is going to ask, how are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? And I'll give it just a few moments for everyone to submit a response here. Thank you, thank you. All right. Just one more moment. Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and end this poll, share these results. All right. It looks like optimism is in the lead. Definitely have some feelings of anxiety and surviving as well, though. So hopefully some of our conversation today will help address some of those feelings. I'm going to stop sharing this poll and launch that second poll. What is keeping you up at night? Finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or surviving? And this one just tells us a little bit more about your current entrepreneurial needs so that we can continue to provide relevant content to all of you. I'll give it just one more moment. Thank you, thank you. All right, gonna end this poll. Share these results. All right, looks like finance coming in the lead, marketing coming up behind, but we got some other needs, sales team and surviving. So thank you for sharing. We will take this into account for future programming, and I'm gonna stop sharing this poll. And without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Shakira DeMessier, Program Manager at the Russell Innovation Center for Entrepreneurs, to talk a little bit about the work that they do. Shakira, it is so awesome to have you back.
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that. And I love those polls. I may have to steal that for other sessions. They're a genius way to get feedback from folks and what to provide next. So super cool. And I will steal it. Good morning or afternoon or evening to everyone on the call. My name is Shakira DeMessier. I am a program manager here at the Russell Center in Atlanta, Georgia. If you're unfamiliar with the Russell Center, it is a center dedicated to the success of Black entrepreneurs. It is a mission that we hold very dear and close to our hearts. I've been with the center for about 2 years, but the center has been going strong for about 5 or so. So we're still kind of in that startup stage. If you'd like to learn more about the Russell Center, you can visit russellcenter.org, russellcenter.org, and it is specifically for businesses in Georgia. So if you are calling in from somewhere else, I'm sorry, we're not the center for you. These are it's specifically for Georgia-based businesses. I do see a few Russell Center members in the participants. So hello, I'm so happy that you guys are here. You're going to learn some really great things. Today we'll be learning from David Chrysler. He is the founder and principal operations consultant at hey Ronald at at the Chrysler Club, which is an organization dedicated to sustainable growth. They're a leader in creating systems to optimize process. If you're interested in learning more about the Chrysler Club, you can visit thechrysler.club. Super easy website to remember.
Awesome. And welcome back, Dave. It's so awesome to have you back on the stage with us. So yeah, welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for the great intro, Shakira, and great to be back with you, Michelle. So yeah, excited to get into this today. I think everybody has recognized just how important supply chain is, and taking a look at how our supply chain efforts impact our businesses and our lives, even from the consumer side of things. So yeah, excited to get into this conversation with everybody today.
Awesome. And so yeah, let's just jump right in. Thank you so much, Shakira. And so Dave, just before we jump right in, could you maybe just give for those who don't know you, just a quick 30 seconds on like who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So happy to. I spent, I actually did the math the other day. I've spent now more than 25 years in and around supply chain, working mostly with manufacturing and distribution businesses. I worked for a large publicly traded company for nearly 20 years, and that was the majority of my professional career. And now as an independent consultant, and really what we do is help businesses to create and optimize their systems in and around supply chain. And that means different things for different businesses, but, at its highest level, this is the stuff we do every day. We're talking about it. We're solving problems for it. So, it's going to be a great conversation to get into.
Awesome. Yep. I'm super excited. So just to dive right in, I think a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience might have an idea of why it is so important to develop a well thought out supply chain strategy. But just kind of like getting into the nitty gritty of it, like how can a strong supply chain strategy contribute to your company's competitive advantage or just its overall success?
Yeah, I think, from a high level, right, I kind of alluded to it in a couple of those opening comments, but I think we've seen over the last few years, whether we've experienced it personally or we've seen it, through news reports, any kind of one of those methodologies, right, we understand the impact of what supply chain is, and it kind of means different things for different businesses, whether you're, trying to build your supply chain, whether you're trying to optimize internally or externally. And then again, how we experience all of that as a consumer, if we go and we're looking to purchase, new appliance or something like that, and, add all of those challenges and, additional costs, right? So I like to think of it from both sides, because the reality of it is, as we are building businesses, as we are growing, we have to be focused both on kind of internally what we're challenged with, how do we optimize for it, but we really have to be mindful of how do our customers perceive what those challenges are. That's really what we're trying to solve for, is understand what value do we bring through the lens of our customers. And so if we think about it from that internal versus external perspective, we kind of start to see just how critical it is. And then again, you can put different aspects of your business in that supply chain, right? It can be all encompassing. We could be talking about just incoming products. We could be talking about only things that happen within our four walls. We could be talking about external, where, it leaves our doors and makes it to our customers. So, supply chain is all encompassing, but is really a matter of saying, like, what are we trying to focus on? How do we, kind of build each part of that, but ultimately through the lens lens of what our customers are seeing, what they're experiencing. That is just like we see it from the consumer side. That ultimately becomes the most important part of all of this.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think that's so important, especially as entrepreneurs are kind of thinking, in an early stage where they're kind of, still thinking about building out that supply chain for their particular business. And I'm wondering, like how kind of consumer thought impacts the way that kind of supplier selection is done, and what key factors entrepreneurs should kind of consider when they're identifying and evaluating potential suppliers that not only align with the needs of the business but the needs of the customer.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a big task, it's a big challenge, and I always say we don't know what we don't know. So oftentimes what may on the surface look like a kind of a perfect partnership, somebody that can help to support and grow your business, if we don't uncover kind of different aspects of what's happening in that business and understand what's happening in that business, ultimately we could be making decisions to partner with somebody who may not be able to support our needs as we're growing our business. So it's really a kind of a tricky thing to navigate. So it's great that we're having this conversation, because I would imagine that a lot of folks in the audience are kind of, these are some of the questions that are keeping them up at night in terms of, how you go through that. For me, I'm looking at all aspects of those partner businesses, right? I'm trying to understand kind of both, from a financial perspective, and what is the wherewithal of that company? What's the track record of that company? Looking beyond the basics, I would say is the better way to kind of, put a bucket around what we're trying to do. Because, it's one thing to say that a potential supplier or a partner of ours could supply a product or manufacture a product for us, and we're going to be responsible for kind of the rest of that supply chain process. But it goes much, much further to understand, will they have the ability to support us in the long term? Is this a short-term, partnership that we're seeking? If it's a long-term partnership that we're seeking, we have to really understand at a detailed level what that business is all about. What do they bring to the table beyond, can they make this thing for me for this price, right? That's the highest level, simplest question to answer. It's all the other stuff that's underneath that can really get us in trouble, because when you build those partnerships, if that particular partner doesn't perform for you, what do? You ultimately end up disrupting your customers. And, it gets very challenging to kind of, recover those relationships. So all of the forethought that goes into this, all of the understanding, who are these people we are potentially getting into this relationship with? Is that going to be somebody that we want to do business with in the long term?
Yeah, absolutely. And I that's really, really important for entrepreneurs, even at that early stage, to kind of, I know it can be hard when, like the runway is short, but like thinking long term about, what these relationships could look like as the business, continues to grow in alignment with your vision for the business. I think that's super important to consider. So yeah, you don't kind of end up in those situations of conflict. And so kind of thinking a little bit deeper into the evaluation of suppliers, what are some of the like specific criteria that entrepreneurs might prioritize, when evaluating suppliers, whether it's like cost or quality, reliability, and what can entrepreneurs do to ensure that their assessment of potential suppliers is fair and comprehensive?
Yeah. I like to think about this from the standpoint of, to me, it's no different than building any type of personal relationship. There's got to be trust on both sides. There's only so many things that you can really evaluate from kind of a KPI standpoint or a metric standpoint to understand, this potential partnership. But it really is a two-way street. It is no different than building a real sustainable relationship with somebody, right? Because that's really what we're doing. It's a business, it's an entity, but we're really trying to establish that business relationship with people. And, so as you kind of dive in beyond that, right, I like to think not just kind of that product, what's the cost of that product, those, again, kind of highest level stuff, but understanding what is the kind of financial capability of that particular company. Is it completely privately held? Is it private equity backed? Is it a public company? All of those will start to give you some additional layers and levels of comfort to understand, is this somebody that we want to partner with? What kind of distribution network do they have? Is it single source? Is it multi-site? Do they have any type of disaster and continuity plan? What happens if a manufacturing facility catches on fire? What is their contingency plan to that? And then you can take a look at it through the lens of, cybersecurity and IT infrastructure. How do their technology and systems, how do those talk to what you're trying to build and the infrastructure that you're trying to put into place? How can you streamline those types of things? So these are all, and I mean, the list just continues to go on and on in terms of, what are you trying to ultimately solve for, right, as you're building these partnerships. And to your point earlier about, it can be daunting when you're trying to kind of, hit the ground running and move this needle further faster. But the reality of it is oftentimes the slower the start, the faster the ramp up, right? So take your time in the beginning, understand the decisions that you're making based on, the information available, and having these types of conversations, very open, dialogue with the folks that you're potentially partnering with, and get that level of comfort. Like I said, really look to build that relationship. That will tell you probably more than you'd ever need to know beyond what somebody can show you in a report. That will probably tell you much more than you need to know to build a long-lasting partnership, because like any relationship, things go wrong. And, what do we do to correct the issue and get back on track? That's all part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of, just as we're thinking about, these relationships long term, just as like a quick follow-up, can entrepreneurs kind of expect this criteria to evolve as their business evolves? And what challenges might they run into, as they're kind of reassessing their supplier relationships, over time, as kind of, industry and market changes just inevitably happen?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that, relationships change over the course of time, and this is really no different, right? What partner may be able to support your needs and your kind of level of technology maturity and process maturity and business maturity may not be the same supplier 5 years from now, 10 years from now, might not be 6 months from now, right? If you're really on kind of a different type of trajectory. So again, I go back to kind of having some of those conversations. What are their growth plans? How are they supporting what they're planning on doing from a technology infrastructure standpoint? Are they in an area that they have access to easy, human capital, and all of these different parts of that? And then again, being mindful of how your business is growing and the needs of that business, and always being, kind of on the lookout and evaluating what's happening. Because again, as you start to become more mature, you are certainly going to be optimizing internally, and that will certainly impact your external relationship. So again, I'll use a really easy one, like from the standpoint of a technology integration. If you get to a point where you need to, integrate your technology with, let's say, their technology, and that is something that, is either a massive undertaking, or they're not as technologically advanced as you are, as your growing your business, that could be that could be a deal breaker, right? Because now all of a sudden there's a tremendous amount of kind of manual interaction. We all know what can happen with manual interaction. We can introduce errors. We can, and again, ultimately that's going to impact your customer base. So, as you start to mature and your business grows, you are going to have to be looking at and evaluating these, relationships. And depending on how quickly your business is growing, that could be on a quarterly basis, that could be on a, semi-annual or annual basis. But yeah, there's certainly going to be changes as, your business grows and as their business changes. There could be outside factors that influence their business that you have no idea, to anticipate. And so again, it's that two-way street. It's that two-way communication and really having a great relationship with these folks. They're not just suppliers. You have to really be mindful of that, especially on the inbound side of things. They're not just suppliers of yours. They really can make or break your entire business if you're relying on those folks to create your products for you, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you brought up like a few really important, like critical challenges that entrepreneurs could potentially, face in kind of just navigating these relationships. And so thinking about, entrepreneurs who kind of, might have like the beginnings of a supplier relationship established, or, are gearing up to that point. What processes or systems can they put in place, like from the business perspective to, mitigate potential disruptions or just enhance the supplier relationship?
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly implement some kind of supplier qualifications, some supplier scorecards. You can certainly implement all different types of technology, whether that's, your ERP system or kind of other levels of functionality that start to give you visibility around all of these kind of KPIs and metrics. And, it's a lot of times I see people get so overwhelmed by the amount of things that we can measure. We really need to look at and identify a couple of really key numbers, utilize those as our base metrics, and kind of, hold people accountable to those particular sets of targets. As you continue to, scale, as you continue to become more mature from both a process and technology standpoint, but also the other part of that is you are getting more valuable customer-facing information, right? So now you can start to integrate all of those pieces throughout the supply chain to understand, as you're making these decisions, this supplier versus that supplier, this, particular maybe distribution channel or transport channel, you can start to bring all of those pieces together and start to make more impactful decisions. But it really comes down to kind of, implementing some really good process flows, the technology to support those process flows, and then keying in on a couple of key factors, KPIs, to say, what are we really need to monitor. And again, I go back to a lot of that will be based on the relationships that you build, the comfort that is there, how critical those folks are to your business. If it's, if you are relying on, let's say, one single source to supply all of your products, that is a different conversation and relationship than if you had 5 suppliers that supported 10 or 20% of your products, and the majority of the products you sell, you manufacture internally. So there's all kinds of different, pieces to that conversation, depending on what type of business you have and that you're, ultimately building. So the more things that are external, the less control you have. That's just, the reality of the situation. That's not to say everything should be done internally, because there are certainly capital considerations, time considerations. There's a whole host of other challenges, to get into if you just focus internally. So, again, it's really about what business are you building? What business are you getting into? How do we deliver, how do we maximize the value for our customers that we are trying to ultimately attract? And how do we do that in kind of the most streamlined, solution possible, right? So no challenge.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, no, and this is just something that entrepreneurs are going to kind of have to invest time in kind of doing the research and really thinking about their business, the needs of their business, and the needs of the customers and how those kind of align with each other. So it's just kind of a long process, but I totally agree that it's a decision that is should be weighed kind of with great consideration. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to have it all figured out to kind of get the ball rolling, right? You're going to learn things as you go. You're going to see what you need to optimize for and what infrastructure you need to build. But you do have to be mindful of the fact that as you start, the more that you outsource from that supplier strategic partner standpoint, the less control you ultimately have. And as you're building your relationships with your customers and putting marketing dollars to work and all of the other things that go along with launching and building a business, it unfortunately doesn't take much to unravel that. That's why business is so hard. And it doesn't matter if it's a service-based business or a product-based business. There's all of these types of considerations to be had. And again, that's why business is hard. That's why, there's such a high failure rate, because there are so many different factors that go into making a business successful. It's not just about identifying the best supplier, because outside external factors can influence them beyond anybody's control. There could be a natural disaster that they've never experienced in that region before, and all of a sudden they no longer have the ability to manufacture the thing that you've created this beautiful relationship to do.
Yeah.
And if you're single source, now what do? You've got a bunch of customer demand, no ability to fulfill that demand, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that in and of itself is why business is difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, just to switch gears a little bit, I want to talk more about customers and kind of, how businesses or, business leaders can accurately predict future demand and, kind of, what interactions with customers can kind of help you gain insight around demand, and, what tools you can kind of implement within your business to assist in this predictive process.
Yeah, I think, as I think about kind of how supply chain has matured and the technology advancements that have taken place, even over the last handful of years, I say there's no better time than today. And I'm sure that that will be different in 6 months or 18 months from now. But we have the ability to aggregate so much data today that we just didn't have the ability to aggregate in, years previous, that there are a lot of things that we can look at from, competitive landscape and data analysis with, giant data pools that, again, we didn't have access to previously. So taking a look at, that type of information and combining that with, maybe historical patterns or, if it's a new business that we're launching, kind of some, again, competitive analysis, some competitive analysis landscape, taking a look at that and understanding, what are the patterns, what are the seasonality trends, if we're talking about maybe like apparel or something like that. If it's non-seasonal, more product centric in terms of like hard, consumer goods or something, we just have the ability to take a look at so much more data to start to build out what some of that demand looks like.
Mm-hmm.
The real answer is that you, in all cases, regardless of the amount of data that you are aggregating, it is still a bit of, a guessing game, and you can become better at the guessing game. And what I like to say is, the educated guess will get you close, but the reality is going to be the reality. And there will be, changes in the market demand. There will be, again, external factors that influence that. So having some beyond the ability to kind of predict what the demand is, having some proactive plans to deal with the inevitable variance that you're going to see. And that variance could be positive. Boy, I need to bring in a lot more supply because the demand is much greater than I anticipated. How do you deal with that? How do you set expectations from your customer, facing standpoint? Or that variance can be negative, right? Oh my gosh, we really missed the mark. We have so much supply here, not nearly enough demand. What are we going to do to offload this inventory, right? Because inventory equals cash. So thinking about your demand as your best educated guess, but also being prepared to know there will be a variance. It's not, that is not a maybe. That is a guarantee. There will be a variance. It's just a matter of if it's positive or if it's negative. And in either case, we have to be thinking about, from a proactive standpoint, we have to be thinking about, as we're creating those demand forecasts, what are we going to do with the variance, right? And if we think about it from a proactive standpoint and understand that the variance is guaranteed, now all of a sudden we are not finding ourselves with our leadership team or our investors, right, saying like, oh, you know what, like, what are we going to do? Right. We're not being reactionary. We're not selling it at a fire sale. There are other ways that you can mitigate kind of the negative, variance. And there are better ways to deal with the positive variance. Hey, maybe we need to ramp up pricing here. Maybe we need to, to increase pricing to slow down demand. What's that do? That increases our margin. Hey, now everybody's winning. We missed demand forecast, but guess what? We're making more margin, right? Yeah. So again, I think that's really the best advice. Do as much as you can in terms of what the demand forecast, but recognize that variance is guaranteed. Could be good, could be bad. And we just need to figure out what are our mitigation plans to deal with that variance.
Absolutely. And so kind of, thinking about improving this process, and there's so many like tools, there's artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies and, just specific like demand forecasting tools. And, how can the insights that you gain from, these resources, not only impact like kind of the decisions you make regarding, demand, but your supplier relationships, and kind of communicating that demand, to your suppliers to kind of align their production with your anticipated demand.
Yeah. The reality is the technology makes it much easier. But where I see, so many people make the mistake is that they lean on the technology first and think that the technology is going to solve the problem. And the real problem that you're solving for is the process itself and understanding, what is that demand? What do we need to do with that demand? How do we then communicate that demand, to your point, back to our suppliers, or, out to the distribution channels, what have you. So I like to break it down and say that, we have to define the process and understand what's the process that we are solving for. And then we can find the technology to execute that process and eliminate the errors within that process. So again, if you seek to solve problems through technology, I guarantee you will find a software salesperson that will guarantee their software solves your problem. The reality of that is that it may, but it may not. And more times than not, it may not. And so what you end up having to do then is you either have to tailor your processes to that specific technology, or you have a adoption issue with the folks on your team because it just doesn't work for them. And so they have to offset the things that it doesn't do with more manual touches, more manual communication. What does that do? Introduce additional errors. What does that mean? That could cost you additional dollars, whether that's in inventory, whether that's in, mistaken orders, delayed orders, all types of issues. So start by understanding what are those process flows that you need to solve for. First and foremost, inventory management. We need to understand what transactions are we creating. We need to understand what are the distribution channels that we're going after, so we can take the kind of customer centric data and aggregate what's that demand. So now we can start to marry what's demand with how are we transacting internally from an inventory management standpoint. Then we can start to say, how do we communicate that back to our supplier channels? Then we can start to say, what technology would allow me to communicate that information in a more efficient and effective manner? What technology are they utilizing that we can seamlessly integrate with our technology to build that partnership? So you start to add all of these layers into your supply chain management, supply chain optimization. That's how it all comes together. And again, depending on who you talk to, some folks will lead you to believe that there is one single technology solution that will do that. And the reality is, again, there are considerations with that. There is technology that is intended for apparel business that bakes in seasonality and, helps to aggregate the data from that seasonality and helps you to understand, what's your full exposure in terms of inventory value for that seasonality, right? And you can also have, if you were to, let's say, integrate that technology into more of a, consumer goods that, just has, typical demand pressures, you could be paying for additional functionality, but that particular solution may say, yeah, but we can do that. We've solved for that problem before. You have inventory control in here. We connect with this supplier that you're already using. So again, I go down a long conversation about that, but those are some things to be considering as you start to unpack this and as you start to build those layers of maturity within your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just to dive a little bit deeper into kind of inventory optimization, it can be kind of a delicate balance, for entrepreneurs to kind of, determine an optimal inventory level to balance supply and demand. And so, what strategies can they rely on to effectively optimize their inventory levels, and kind of what are your thoughts on kind of just like best practices for implementation of like an inventory tracking system within their business?
Yeah. Again, I kind of say the first thing I would seek to understand is kind of the level of process maturity and the level of kind of, how much data do we have access to? Is this a new business that we're launching? What data exists from a demand perspective in the world today that we can take a look at and kind of utilize in our forecasting? And then, so that's kind of the lowest level starting point. And then all the way up through, right, some very high-end ERP systems that will go all the way down to helping you understand like what is an economic order quantity, and helping you to calculate demand based on, not just what you've purchased in the past, what your customers have purchased in the past, but how long have you held that inventory? What's the cost to hold that inventory? What's the cost compared to what you've sold that inventory for? So it can go kind of span the gamut depending on the level of organizational and process maturity that you've kind of gotten to. And again, walk before you run, because whether it's your money or investor money, you can spend a whole boatload of it on technology that is not going to solve the problem for you. Right. So the basics will always kind of rule the roost, in my opinion. And yes, you can put a lot of bells and whistles on it, but at the end of the day, there's only a couple of key factors that you have to understand. What are your customers purchasing? And then there will be a variance based on what you've planned to purchase to support that demand. How are we going to deal with that? Are we going to raise prices to stem, that demand? Are we going to liquidate, when we missed it on the negative side, right? You don't need a fancy technology stack to tell you that. You need to understand the basics of supply and demand. And then how do we allocate and track the transactions from an inventory management standpoint? So really basic stuff. Don't get into the thought process of we have to, have this crazy ERP stack. We have to have this, separate inventory management program. Not when we're getting started. Walk before you run, and you'll be much further ahead. You'll understand your business at a level that a lot of folks don't, because you're doing the basics, but you're doing them from a perspective of understanding how to build out this infrastructure, how to better your relationships, both on the supplier and on the customer side.
Love it. Absolutely. And so just to kind of round us out here, thinking about distribution and how, it's going to look different, obviously, depending on your product or service, your industry. But, what criteria is kind of fundamental to deciding, the optimal distribution channels, and how, might entrepreneurs balance or prioritize, potential factors in a way that results in significant operational improvements where they're needed most?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, from my perspective, it kind of comes down to, from a business perspective, what are we trying to do? Are we a disruptor? Are we trying to change the model from, maybe a traditional distribution network to direct to consumer? Or are we building a competitor? And so I think once you understand what your business goal is, then you can start to determine, what are the best channels and how do we optimize for that? Is it going to be multi-channel? Is that the best model? Maybe your competitors are multi-channel, but you want to focus. Again, there's no right answer to a lot of this stuff, which again goes back to why business is such a challenge. It's not a matter of a right or wrong answer. It's a matter of what do you want to build? So, I kind of like that initial question, like, are you a disruptor? If you are, what's the channel that, how do you want to change the traditional market? And then again, that decision is going to potentially change the trajectory of the data that you have access to, right? And then how you can ultimately launch and grow your business. Because let's say your competitors have traditionally been through a distribution network. Well, you're not going to be able to aggregate a lot of that data if you're trying to go to direct to consumer, right? So you're going to have to build that from scratch. You're going to have to understand at a different level, what's that demand? How are you having those, conversations and connections? How are you going to then support that demand? It's a different model and relationship that you're building. So I think once you have that question dialed in and understand, like, what are we trying to do, then it becomes much easier to optimize within one, particular channel or multi-channel. And then again, all of that kind of comes back to how do we aggregate that data? How do we evaluate, the information that we do have available? What assumptions are we willing to make? And finally, from a proactive standpoint, what are we going to do with the variance, right? Variance will always exist. That is the one guarantee I can put out there.
Yeah.
There will always be a variance. So we just have to plan for that in the onset. And then all of a sudden we feel much more confident as we start to see what way are we leaning? Are we right on target? Man, we really crushed this one. Are we, trailing? What are we going to do? We already have a plan in place if we're trailing. We already have a plan in place if we're running ahead of track and we know our supplier can only deliver X amount in any given, week, month, quarter, right? So we've already mitigated our potential downside because we've proactively planned what we're doing with this variance that is inevitable.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Awesome. Well, Dave, this has been such an amazing conversation, and we do have some questions coming in live.
Cool.
So I want to jump right in.
Awesome.
If
Fire
you're
away.
in the audience and you have a question, please submit that. We'll try to get to as many as possible. So we have one person asking here. I think this is an interesting question. If you're kind of looking to hire someone to kind of manage your supply chain, what does that role look like, and how can entrepreneurs best support that person in that role?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of supply chain professionals out in the marketplace. And I think understanding and finding some alignment with their work history and what you're trying to do from a business model standpoint, at its highest level is kind of the best advice that I can give. You want to find people that kind of align with what's the model that you're trying to recreate here. And, how much experience do they have in that? The other thing I would add is, and I see this outside of supply chain. So this is kind of a general rule, whether we're talking about hiring or supplier relationships or anything, make sure you're speaking the same language. Supply chain means different things to different folks. Okay. It could be vendor selection and relationships. It could mean, entire supply chain from vendor selection, managing relationships, to internal operations, to warehouse management, to transportation management. So understand the conversation that you're having and don't be afraid to ask something as kind of, low level and rudimentary as that, because if you don't understand the conversation you're having in terms of that terminology and what it means to them versus what it means to you, you're going to really be at a disadvantage, because you're going to be thinking you've brought somebody in to manage this entire thing. And then you're going to find out that they've really only managed, picking and packing, let's say, and warehouse distribution. And you need to find a new vendor because you're really struggling, with that particular vendor and their, ability to support your demand forecasts. So understand who you're talking to, look for synergy there in terms of what their experience is and what aspect of the supply chain you're really trying to solve for. So keep in mind, the more broad, the more expensive.
Yeah, that's how it goes. No, but that's great. That's really great insight. And then we have someone here asking specifically about, just best practices for navigating relationships with manufacturers in particular. What advice you might have for that?
Yeah, without knowing kind of, further details, hard to really dive into that. But I go back to, if you think about that as a relationship, like you would build a relationship with, with your partner, it's very much the same thought process. In some cases, manufacturers have a hold on a lot of folks that they've built these relationships with. So you need to understand, like, what does that look like? How beholden to this one particular manufacturer am I going to be? If you're using multiple manufacturers, what's the consistency between those manufacturing sites? How can I ensure quality on the inbound side to ultimately satisfy my customer demand? So, and then I'll add one more layer of complexity. You could say, oh, we'll just do it internally. Well, that's a whole nother challenge that you're about to embark on, because, it's its own business in and of itself. So, building relationships with people and understanding their business model what they're great at, what they're not great at. That could be communication, that could be technology, that could be quality, that could be, one of a number of other things. But that's, at least at a high level, those are some considerations. It's all of this stuff that we do is about people, right? So building a relationship with the person that you're interfacing with, meeting more people in that organization, salespeople, customer service people, production people, who are their quality people, who are their finance people, right? Building those relationships, and the more people you have a comfort with understanding who this person is, how do they interface with that business, how long have they been there, what kinds of things do they say when they're alone versus in the team, right? All of those are little clues. Just, again, I go back, like, think about when you were dating, somebody before, or multiple people, right? Before you picked a partner. It's kind of the same thing. You have to look at it through that lens and look for those little clues, look for those little flags, whether they're green or red, and put them in a tally bucket and say, like, is this somebody that I could see working with for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? Is this somebody I can imagine building a life with, right? Because that's really what we're doing when we partner with a supplier or manufacturer.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so we have a few entrepreneurs kind of asking about, just curiosity around the benefits and challenges that they might encounter when sourcing across borders, just kind of at a high level, what that can look like.
I think by and large, you're best in that scenario, you're best suited to find, a partnering agent. And the reason I say that is because in a lot of scenarios, at minimum, you're going to have some generally language challenges. And again, it gets back to the conversation that we're having. If I think I'm asking for this particular thing, but from their perspective, they are interpreting that as something different than what I'm asking for, there will be missed expectations. And so, at its lowest level, that's what you really have to solve for when you're going, and I don't even think that's a cross-border issue, but that's another layer to it, right? But getting to that, having the same conversation, saying the same thing. And I think when you are going cross-border, having an agent or an intermediary, somebody that is very familiar with, kind of the business customs of that particular area and with those particular suppliers, manufacturers, that is the first place that I would start. And then I would also, beyond that, you have to now, because you're introducing a third party, right? You have to really understand, what is their business model? What are they doing? Is this an extension of that company? Is this an independent? And again, pluses and minuses to all of this stuff, but those are some of the things to be mindful of. Again, internally or cross-border, get on the same page with the conversation, make sure you're talking about the exact same thing. And then, then you can start to build from there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really great. And I think that's kind of just a necessary step. That's, when you're kind of in this early stages, like, really important to kind of take that, time to, find that right person and to optimize, those potential relationships. I love that.
Yeah, I think just to add to that quickly, again, I go back to the walk before you run. We could get so excited about, building the thing and selling the thing, but these infrastructure pieces are just beyond critical. I mean, I can't say it under, any other way. It gets exciting to build a business and to launch a business or to bring in a new product and to do all the fun stuff, all the marketing and, all the customer centric side and, get the excitement around the thing. But at the end of the day, none of that means anything, because if you don't build the base of what you're trying to do and have these well-established relationships, you're going to disappoint all of the other work and all of the positive momentum that you've done. So, This is really critical. Take your time, spend your resources on this part as much as you want to spend them on the fun part. You know, that's
Yeah.
really the best advice I could give.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I mean, that may have been your key takeaway, but this has been such an amazing conversation and I've learned a lot. And if you had, I don't know if that was your key takeaway, but if you had one piece of wisdom or something you carry with you as a business leader that you just wanted to share, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a great takeaway, but business is all about people, no matter what part of it you're in. So build good relationships, treat people the way that you want to be treated. And, don't be afraid to ask for help. Those are all things that are universal in, the years of business, no matter what business I've been in. All of those pieces of advice are universal. So I'll leave it there. And thanks so much for having me. And just a ton of fun as always. So thanks, Michelle.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave. Always such a pleasure to have you here. And on behalf of the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center and everyone here today, we're just so thankful that you joined us. So it's been awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Awesome. And to our audience, we would love for you to join us again for upcoming webinars, which you can view using that link that's going to be posted in the chat. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.